On a recent X thread of yours, you suggested that we should have a seat and talk about the importance of DePIN for the present and the future of civilization. So here we are. I could ask you what DePIN means, but let's first start with an easier question. How dependent is our civilization to artificial intelligence and spatial computing today? And how dependent to it do you think we will be in 2 or 3 decades?
So today artificial intelligence is just starting to enter the workforce, but it's done so very, very quickly. I saw recently that already a measurable percentage of the words generated on a given day is generated by AI. And by a measurable percentage, I mean something like 1% already of all the words generated on a given day is generated by AI. And this will probably accelerate quite quickly. Alarmingly, it may be the majority of words soon generated by AI. Artificial intelligence is already starting to enter the workforce. It's generating a lot of content, productive content and not so productive content. And I think we're going to see increasingly that artificial intelligence will be responsible for how energy is spent in our civilization. Of course, artificial intelligence will consume more and more energy, absolutely. We've had a very interesting conversation for many years about the energy consumption of things like blockchain and Bitcoin. And I think very soon we'll be having similar conversations about the energy consumption of artificial intelligence. But not just the energy consumption, but the direction of energy will increasingly be done by artificial intelligence. Already computers are monitoring and maintaining a lot of our systems. But with these new artificial intelligences, we'll be letting computers make decisions on our behalf more and more. I imagine that within a decade, most of the decisions that are made for critical operation of infrastructure and services will be made by artificial intelligences. Geoffrey Hinton, the famous AI researcher, used an analogy recently that when you go to a doctor, wouldn't you rather go to a doctor that has experience with 1 million patients with similar symptoms? And an AI can be that knowledgeable, but a human cannot. Very soon, if not already, AI is a better candidate for the best possible person for the job, or not person, but best possible for any particular job. How does this tie into spatial computing? Well, as we've discussed before, artificial intelligence has no inherent understanding of the physical world. Spatial computing is really just the art of teaching digital devices and software to understand its physical surroundings. The reason the Apple Vision Pro is a spatial computer is it's a computer that understands its physical surroundings. That's what it is. It's a spatial computer. And if you want artificial intelligence to understand the physical world, it needs spatial computing. Spatial computing is the part of artificial intelligence that understands the physical world.
You often say that for artificial intelligence to cross the boundaries of computer, it needs spatial computing. What if, you definitely convinced that this is going to happen, this is the direction we're taking, and that we enable a different population, the 100 million inhabitants.
100 billion even.
100 billion inhabitants of the world. Can you try to paint a picture of what this would look like? 100 billion thinking, productive inhabitants of the world. Just give me a little,
When I say that the world is going to grow to 100 billion thinking, productive inhabitants, what I mean is that decisions are going to be made by more and more entities. as we start inviting AI into our workflows and into our civilization management in general, we will see more and more intelligent processes being involved in decision making. I say inhabitant rather than people because I don't want to force a conversation about AI rights or anything like this. I just want to get us to a point where we recognize that these thinking processes are going to play a bigger and bigger role. I don't think it's crazy to imagine that 5 years from now our office assistant will be an AI that is figuring out when to turn on and off the lights and things like this. Smart homes, smart offices, smart cities, these things will be managed by artificial intelligences. It's not crazy to imagine that our payroll will be managed by an artificial intelligence. Already artificial intelligence is playing a big role in our communication internally, externally, helping us write code. And the amount of AIs per capita is going to explode. If you imagine 100 billion thinking inhabitants at a world population, rounded up to 10 billion humans, something like that, you're really just talking about 10 AIs per human, which I don't think is necessarily that much. I think the path from where we are now to 100 billion inhabitants is quite short, actually. When I grew up in Sweden had the most computers per capita when I was a kid. I remember already before I was in high school, the average Swedish household had more than 2 computers. Now, we have 2 computers on our body. You'll have your iPhone and your Apple Watch. Both of those are computers. And you have your laptop in your backpack. I often travel with 5 or so computers. And for each computer, there may be more than one artificial intelligence. So the path to 100 billion thinking devices is rather short. I wouldn't be surprised if in this decade already that's true.
You added that they are or will become economic agents of our society. In which way?
So by an economic agent, I mean that they will be tasked with making economic decisions and enforcing economic preferences, making choices on our behalf and on behalf of whatever mission they've been tasked with. So an artificial intelligence that is helping you balance your budget is an economic agent. An artificial intelligence that is choosing, which way for you to drive home is an economic agent. If here in Hong Kong, for example, whenever we drive from Kowloon to Hong Kong Island, we have to choose, are we taking the tunnel with the toll or the tunnel without the toll? And that's an economic decision that the driver always has to make. I don't think we're very far away from the AI making that decision for you based on your economic preference. You just tell, here's the premium I put on time, here's the premium I put on money. Based on whatever traffic data you have, I trust you to make a decision on what tunnel we take. For example, during work hours, I have a rough sense of how much an hour of my time is worth to the company. So it's very easy to calculate, for example, if I'm gonna get to where I'm going 20 minutes faster, taking the toll tunnel, then it's absolutely worth it. And having an AI that calculates that more effectively on my behalf and makes these decisions for people in general means that the economy will be smoother, resources will be better allocated, and the kind of things that is hard for a human to calculate on the fly and keep in mind becomes pretty easy for an AI to do. There's so much inefficiency in your typical human organization, your typical company, that AI can really help with. One of the experiences I had working at a bigger company was I was tasked with recruiting a star team for something, and I had this really talented PhD on the line. He was really interested, and to close the deal, I just needed to hop on a quick flight, sit down with him for coffee, and just push him over the edge. And it was a very short flight, just from Stockholm to Helsinki. It would have been a €100 flight, something like this. And the company I worked for spent much more money than that just going through the process of buying me that ticket. To determine, is this a reasonable business expense? Are there cheaper tickets? Blah, blah, blah. If the job really is to save the company money, there are better ways to go about it than most human organizations that we put together. As humans, we know with the limited intelligence we have, with the limited time we have, with the limited resources we have, we tend to build organizations like the one I was working at, where there's going to be someone that's going to look at this and say, I don't know, we have a policy that I'm referencing here that says you're not allowed to book flights on such short notice. I'm going to have to escalate this to someone else, etc., etc. And I remember having this big fight with the company about it. Like, you're trying to save €100, but you've spent much more than €100 stopping me from buying this ticket. It would have been cheaper for you just to buy the ticket. And I think within a few years, companies will be able to navigate things like this much more easily, because the AI will help make those decisions on the fly and calculate the economic gain on the fly a lot faster.
I think we can make the case that this will create a form of dependency to, like, we're going to lose our agency and give it to the AI, who's going to make all these decisions to optimize our travels, for instance, in this example. But I think beyond this issue of interdependency with AI, there's also the idea that all these data and information which are critical, so economic informations about your life, about your company, are critical to the existence, to the sustainability of your company. And this is going somewhere. I mean, it's being stored somewhere, it's being analyzed somewhere to produce the best response for you. And I think this is one of the major concerns that DePIN and here at Auki Labs and with the Posemesh projects you're trying to address. So DePIN means decentralized physical infrastructure networks. But what is it? What does it really do? When was it created, and what problem is it solving?
It's hard to say when DePIN was truly created. As a concept, DePIN is the idea that the infrastructure that makes a service run is not owned by a single participant. It's distributed, and its ownership is decentralized. And what problem it solves will be very different from use case to use case. DePIN abstractly doesn't solve any one particular problem other than the centralization of power. But when it comes to like what practical issues it solves, it's different from use case to use case. If we look at the Posemesh, for example, we have a DePIN for multiplayer networking. Why? Why have we done that? Well, in spatial computing, when you do collaborative spatial computing or you're doing multiplayer spatial computing, it's very, very important to have low latency. And latency is determined essentially by the distance you have to travel over the internet. Not the geographical distance, but the internet distance between 2 points. And there will often be a correlation between geographical distance and internet distance, but it's not a perfect one-to-one mapping.
For example, you mean it goes to a server that is somewhere in the planet and bounce back to...
Yes, but on the path to the server, it might have had to go through many different routers and switches and things like this. Even though you may think that, oh, it's just, from my device to the server to your device, there may be many other hops and skips that happen. It went through this cable and up to that satellite and things like this. The shortest path over the internet really just means how quickly can we get between each other, typically measured in milliseconds. And for collaborative spatial computing, you want the lowest possible latency. And traditional infrastructure for these kinds of services are all cloud-based. What does cloud-based mean? Well, it means someone else's computer, really. So the server, typically a multiplayer server would be hosted on something like AWS, and AWS have many different servers across the world, these availability regions. And no matter, let's say that we have a multiplayer server in Stockholm, for example. If I am connecting to that server from Hong Kong and you are connecting to that server from Stockholm, you and I will have different latency to this server, absolutely. If both of us are in Hong Kong, like we are now, and we both connect to this Stockholm server, that's unfortunate. Now, luckily, of course, Amazon has more servers, and Google has more servers, and we can pick one in Singapore or something like that that's much closer. But a company that is trying to provide excellent service is going to have to turn to one or several of these cloud providers to make sure that there are always servers nearby. And they own and maintain all of these servers together with the cloud provider. What we realized we could do is, well, a lot of these collaborative sessions, a lot of these multiplayer sessions actually require very little hardware. It really just requires a little bit of spare bandwidth and just enough compute to route messages. It's something that a Raspberry Pi can handle. It's something that can be run in the background on your laptop, things like this. You don't need a really beefy server to do this. But of course, if you are building a cloud, you're going to build big beefy servers that are split into virtual machines, and these virtual machines can be very small and handle the traffic. But it's like, well, actually there are millions, billions probably of computers out there that are not that busy, that could do a little bit more work. And a lot of them are connected to unmetered internet, meaning internet that you don't pay per megabyte. So why don't we give those computers a little bit more work and allow them to earn rewards for using their time more meaningfully? It's kind of like how Airbnb increased the utilization rate of homes and Uber increased the utilization rate of cars. The idea was, here's this physical asset, a home, a car, a server, a computer, but it's not busy all the time. What can we do to increase its utilization rate? So we realized, okay, we can increase the utilization rate of computers that are out there already by giving them this very simple task of being multiplayer servers. So that makes us a DePIN, a decentralized physical infrastructure network. It's a network of other people's computers, not one big agent. It's not Amazon, it's not Google. It's a bunch of different people that have their own machines that they are willing to lend some of the time of that machine to provide this service to the Posemesh. And what this gives us is that we have many, many more alternatives, over 300 different places now, that someone trying to do multiplayer over the Posemesh or collaborative spatial computing over the Posemesh, they have over 300 alternatives that they can connect to find the lowest possible latency compared to, maybe 50 or so if you're on AWS or Google Cloud. So many times more. And this number is growing. And ultimately, I think a mature version of the Posemesh may have as many as 1 million of these computers who are just spending some of their time helping out with these tasks. It's no big deal for them to just if there's some traffic that wants to bounce through me, I can accommodate that traffic. It's no sweat. And this is where DePIN becomes very exciting compared to cloud. because it allows us to increase the utilization rate of computers that are already out there. And it allows us to not have this one central agent that, as an emergent property of cloud computing, also receives and processes all of this data. And then we have to trust them not to abuse getting all of this data. By decentralizing this power, not only have we created a better ethical framework for the dealing of data, but in many use cases, like the use case of the Posemesh, actually a technically superior approach as well, where we can get lower latency and we increase the utilization rate of computers that are already out there. We don't have to generate as much new hardware. We don't have to build bigger server parks. We don't have to deal with the challenge of provisioning up and down a cloud. It's really just, hey, all of you computers out there, are you available to take care of this session? The thing that is making DePIN more realistic now, regardless of when was DePIN invented, DePIN becomes a lot more realistic when people can be fairly compensated for participating in the DePIN. Because of course, if you are letting me borrow your computer as a server, you're providing a service to me. And why would you do that? If I can compensate you for that, that becomes a lot easier. And
excuse me, because that uses which resources from the person who lends its computer?
Using your computer.
It's like the CPU, the battery, but also the internet, the bandwidth. What does it use?
It depends on the DePIN use case. For us in particular, it's a little bit of CPU and bandwidth. So it's not very CPU intensive. It's not going to show up on your electricity bill. It's not like Bitcoin mining or anything like this, but we're still using your computer. And
so it's aging, yeah.
We would be worse off if you didn't let us borrow your computer, right? You're doing something that's valuable to us, so we should compensate you for it. And the greater blockchain ecosystem, having built up exchanges and market makers and all of these things, makes it possible to very easily set up these kinds of international reward networks, where if we had to do this through a traditional banking ecosystem, it would be very difficult. But with smart contracts and wallets, it becomes quite easy for someone like you to say, you know what, I'm happy for this computer to participate in the Posemesh. Here's my wallet. Send me rewards if you send me traffic. Whereas, with traditional banking, this would be, like, here are my bank details, and we have to, process international wires.
But then, is there a safety issues with spreading so much data to unverified servers around the world?
Yeah, there certainly can be. So, again, for different use cases and what kind of data is being sent over there, it can be very sensitive. Now, over Hagel, our decentralized multiplayer server, the data that's being exchanged over there is not sensitive. It's just position updates in a coordinate system that is meaningless to the person that's running the server. Like you couldn't meaningfully really do anything with that information, even if it wasn't encrypted. But of course, we're just trading encrypted information over the server. And even if you intercepted those messages, you can't really do anything with it. But of course, there are other scenarios where the data would be more sensitive and it would be more attractive for someone to steal it.
What would it be, for example? Which scenario?
Image data, for example. Like if we started to exchange image data of what you're seeing through your camera so that you could do things like collaborative SLAM, things like this, then we need to be a lot more careful that whoever is relaying those messages cannot look at the pictures. When we're only sending post updates, even if you read the post update, it's not going to be meaningful to you because it's in a coordinate system that you are not calibrated into and you don't understand really what's happening. But if I'm sending you images and you can decrypt and see those images, then you get to see the inside of my home or the inside of my business, and you get to see me running around in my underwear or whatever, and I don't want that. And yes, there's always a risk that whoever is processing the information can abuse this. And our philosophy on this is it's better to not put all eggs in one basket. Rather than all of us sending all of our data to Google, it's better to send a little bit of data here, a little bit of data there. So the impact of a bad actor is limited. If someone starts spying, they have less data to spy on, and the impact of it is less pernicious. If you, Alix, start spying on my camera feed, you can do less with that than what Google can do if they're spying on all of our camera feeds. There's nothing we or any protocol can do to stop people outright from spying on you. So what we can do is we can make life troublesome for the people that would spy on you and just not give them access to all that much data. But also, of course, we want to make sure that we can trust the people that participate in the Posemesh. This is, of course, an important problem, which is, again, why the greater blockchain ecosystem actually is quite helpful, because they've invented concepts like staking and have smart contracts for that can allow us to make you put in something like a deposit or a reputation with us, where if we detect that you're doing something that's not allowed, we can actually economically damage you. You know, we can take your deposit and say like, hey, you said that you would be doing this, but you're instead doing that. This is not good for the protocol. And now you're going to lose your economic stake. And this doesn't remove bad actors, but it creates a stronger financial incentive not to be a bad actor.
And who's going to define what's allowed and not allowed? Like, is that subject to government's approval, or is it up to...
Different for different use cases, again, right? The first thing that we are concerned with for, why are you staking a reputation with us? The first thing that we want to make sure is that you provide the service that you said that you would provide, which is things like uptime and performance, right? If you tell us that, hey, we can trust you to provide this service and we can send our customers through you, but then your server is not online, or you go offline in the middle of a session, then you have created a bad experience for the customer. That's not good. We need to be able to let people that are building on the Posemesh feel confident that the service will work. So if you are going to provide your compute to our network, you have to put in some assurance that the compute will really do what you're saying. So that's the first thing we're doing with our protocol, is you enter a smart contract saying, I am willing to handle this much work for this period of time. And if I don't do that, if I fail to deliver that work, you can economically punish me for that.
Can we talk about DePIN devices? Is that correct terminology?
There are certainly devices that were made to be part of DePIN from the very beginning. I think Helium is a great example of a company that produced a lot of devices for a DePIN. DePIN is, or Helium is maybe the most famous DePIN example in the world, where they created these hotspots for long-range Wi-Fi, not the kind of Wi-Fi that you and I would use to watch Netflix, but the kind of Wi-Fi that an IoT device would use to send some low-fidelity sensor data, like a temperature update, something like this. And they produced through themselves and their partners, they produced and sold almost 1 million of these devices. There's a huge amount of these Helium miners that people could own and place somewhere in the physical world and extend the Helium network and earn rewards for doing this. So they produced specific hardware for this. Sure, under the hood, it's a Raspberry Pi and some antennas, blah, 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 but they produced specific devices. So their approach was not, hey, let's increase the utilization rate of existing computers, but rather let's create computers, let's have the ownership of the computers be decentralized, and let's have them be distributed, and create economic incentives for people to take care of their machine and its performance. Our approach is a little bit different because we don't want to produce more hardware. We think there's enough hardware out in the world already, and we want to take the Airbnb/Uber approach of increasing the utilization rate of existing hardware. But yes, there are DePIN devices in that they were made specifically to participate in this or that protocol.
But then potentially any of our computers can be a DePIN devices, if I understand well. Okay.
Yes, any internet connected sensor or computer could potentially be part of a DePIN. And for spatial computing, I think that decentralized sensor networks are also going to play a huge role. You know, when you are an AI and you want to understand the physical world, you need sensor input. You need to be able to see, you need to be able to hear, and the more you can see and hear, the better it is. My laptop does not have that many sensor modalities that lets it understand the world. And, you know, there's a little webcam, stuff like this. But if there's an AI running on my laptop, using the computer on my laptop, but it can also tap into the different webcams we have in our demo store, etc., that decentralized sensor network is very helpful to the AI on my computer. So I think one of the things that we will see this decade and the next decade is the deployment of very big decentralized sensor networks. And this is something that to the blockchain community's credit, they've been very early on spotting, saying like, hey, there are a lot of sensors out there in the world that belong to people that could provide a larger civilization scale service. Things that seem, I forget the name of the project, but there are projects, for example, that allow you to contribute the data from your thermometer. And then you have this distributed worldwide thermometer service that tells you what the temperature is in different parts of the world with very, very fine-grained granularity, because you can really see what is the difference in temperature between this city block and that city block, etc. Because it's people volunteering the information and not one company putting sensors everywhere.
Is, you know, Waze?
Sure.
Is Waze considered is Waze using DePIN technology right now? Because it's very collaborative, sharing data.
Yes and no, right? Like Waze has built a distributed sensor network, which is very, very cool, but it's not decentralized because Waze owns and receives all of this data. A decentralized version of Waze would be one where the car owner is the one that owns this data and gets to contribute the data in exchange for a reward, etc. There's not just a technical but a political component to DePIN, which implies that the sensor network is not owned by one entity.
You put it in one sentence, you say DePIN tech will enable people to have a network which will be democratically funded, owned and operated by the people. I mean, who wouldn't want this? But what can go wrong?
I don't know if there's unique failure cases for DePIN, where DePIN can fail in ways that centralized technology cannot fail, other than, you know, you're opening up to more actors that could potentially behave poorly. A poorly designed DePIN has more people that you have to trust to behave well than a centralized one where you really only have to trust one actor. But this is what strategy is correct there is almost a matter of aesthetics. For us, we think it's better not to put all your eggs in one basket and to limit the damage of any one thing failing rather than invite this critical failure of what happens if we can't trust Google anymore. But your strategy may vary there. DePIN networks can do what centralized services do, and in many cases can do it better. Again, the Posemesh, I think, is a very good example of a DePIN that can actually outperform centralized cloud services, where there are technical things that we can achieve better because the hardware is distributed and maintained by people that are not us, etc., that makes the network technically superior to a cloud-based infrastructure. But it's also, in our opinion, morally superior to a cloud-based infrastructure because this data doesn't aggregate with us. You don't have to trust us specifically. And sure, you have to trust the participants somewhat in the Posemesh, but each participant in the Posemesh has much less incentive to to cheat, right? For Google, receiving all of this information, the temptation is very, very great to look under the hood, because what you can do with all of that data is, it can give you almost unimaginable amounts of power. Especially now in the AI training arms race, it must take an enormous amount of restraint for Google not to train an AI on everything that's in your Gmail inbox.
What tells you they aren't?
Maybe they are, right? Maybe they are. And this is what's scary. We have to trust them with all of this data. But if this data didn't sit with one entity, then the incentive for that entity to cheat is lower because there's not that much for them to gain. And we can also make the penalty proportionally more deterring, because if each individual actor is putting in their reputation deposit to say, like, I'm going to behave here, that reputation deposit can be proportionally more deterring than it would be for Google to pay a fine of a few hours of revenue if they do something unforgivable at a civilizational scale. Ultimately, we don't even know how to punish companies like Google and Meta when they breach our trust. We haven't thought of good proportional punishments for these big corporations to break our trust. Even when we slap them with a big fine, that big fine is usually a few hours or a few days of revenue, and it's just the cost of doing business. It's cheaper to ask for forgiveness than permission for a lot of these big companies, and we hope that decentralization reduces the incentive to cheat, increases the financial deterrence for behaving poorly, and stops the centralization of power.
What will be the conditions for a massive expansion of DePIN devices? Should it be, you think, a politically enforced decision, or can it just happen organically?
I think thanks to the larger blockchain ecosystem now, where it's possible to have wallets, exchange value with each other, that the free market can and will and already is building DePIN networks. People can engage in DePIN not only because of their ethical and political interests, but just purely through their financial self-interest. We saw this with the Helium network, for example, where again, I think 900,000 devices or so were bought. Some of them bought the devices because they believe in the mission and they want to participate. But I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of people bought the devices hoping that they would get a return. Now, in the Helium specific case, of course, a lot of the people that bought those devices didn't get a positive return. But yeah, I don't think you need governments to say, hey, we are going to do things DePIN. I don't know that a government ever would. But the free market can actually create DePIN networks, and is already creating DePIN networks, and this is pretty cool. As a civilization, we've now built all of this financial plumbing that allows us to enter into these smart contracts with each other and make our hardware available to each other and build truly civilization scale infrastructure together. And that's pretty wild, actually. I think in a way, Satoshi's true legacy is not the invention of Bitcoin being digital gold or anything like this. It's really just that downstream from Bitcoin, this cultural movement that was spawned that ended up building exchanges and market makers and all of this financial plumbing that's in place now allows us as a civilization to come together and form these trustless networks. And that is just a radical new chapter in civilization building, because now civilization scale infrastructure can be funded by the people, it can be owned by the people, and the rewards of operating it can go directly to the people as well. In this century, civilization will be able to deploy civilization scale infrastructure projects without the involvement of government, and that's new in history. That wasn't possible before. So the Posemesh is a DePIN project to ultimately try to replace the GPS as the default positioning system for digital devices and enable these kinds of decentralized sensor networks and compute networks that can make spatial computing collaborative. The idea is that as we enter into the age of AI, etc., that spatial computing is a very, very important part of what's needed to allow digital devices to understand the physical world. But rather than imagining a cloud-based spatial computing paradigm where all of our spatial computing data goes into one big central map of the world owned by someone like Google, instead we make a decentralized protocol for moving between self-sovereign maps of spaces. So you should own the map of your apartment. You shouldn't have to send that data to someone else. Amazon shouldn't know how big your bedroom is, etc. This is your private information. But you still want to be able to allow devices to come visit and make use of your digital twins, to have AR experiences together with you. And to do that, you need an interoperable protocol running on a decentralized physical infrastructure network. So the idea of the Posemesh is rather than one big digital twin of the whole world living in Google's cloud somewhere, instead there are millions, billions of maps owned by the people themselves, and an interoperable protocol that allows the devices and the AI to visit these places and provide fair compensation to each other for the value that they provide. The vision of the Posemesh is a decentralized GPS replacement that allows AI to understand the physical world and enables things like smart cities. The age of AI is likely to expand the economy by something like 100 times. This decade or next decade. You're going to see a huge hockey stick of growth. But I believe that most of that economic value, most of those transactions, most of that economic interaction is going to be happening outside of the view of humans. It's going to be AI to AI, machine to machine, moving at a speed that is not meaningful to us. So I imagine that 20 years from now, economically, humans are a minority, and most of civilization's energy output and money consumption will be by and for AI.
Where do governments fit into that? Like, do you think there's a possible involvement of government in decentralization as well? Do they have a card to play, or are they're just going to push back and make sure that this doesn't happen?
If we, the people, recognize, if democratic governments recognize, or even autocratic governments recognize that private corporations are a threat to the power of either the democratic government or the autocratic government, that companies are wielding too much power, then just like governments can enforce antitrust monopoly laws, they could potentially enforce the decentralization of power. Potentially. It's not a foregone conclusion that governments would do this. Governments tend to enrich themselves and give power to themselves, etc. Very few governments are concerned with being monopolies themselves. Government does what government does. But we could certainly imagine that governments could try, and arguably should try, to push for more decentralization. It's probably not in humanity's best interest or in any particular people's best interest to let Google see the world through all of our face-mounted cameras. That's probably not in humanity's best interest, and hopefully government can stop that from happening. The unique lever that government can pull that the rest of us cannot pull is they have the legitimate use of force, and it can put people in jail for being bad. You and I don't get to do that. We don't get to jail Google if they're behaving poorly, but a government potentially can. So if the free market and our ideals don't stop dystopia from unfolding, then hopefully the physical might of the government can help stop dystopia from happening.
Which one of the two do you think will be more efficient at doing this?
I wouldn't bet against the free market. The free market, especially when combined with artificial intelligence, is going to be a very powerful decision-making force. You know, arguably the economy is already a kind of a artificial intelligence that intelligently allocates resources to where they are needed in the world. This is why I'm saying, you know, Satoshi's legacy may really be creating this technological movement that makes it possible for things like DePIN to emerge, for people to enter into these contracts together, to build infrastructure together, to fund, own, and operate infrastructure together. It's a really radical shift in human organization.
Auki Labs. Share your vision.